So we're starting this brand new series called Under the Microscope. And no, you don't get free microscopes. And no, this isn't actually science class, but we will be talking about science for the next few weeks. How many of you guys, you like science class? Okay, the majority of you, with one person saying they hate science, okay? Okay? All right, so here's the thing. We're going to talk about this the next few weeks for an important reason, and that is because oftentimes, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it seems like there is this rift that is created between science and faith. You guys like feel this at times? I don't know if you're like, some of you might, maybe you're young enough where you don't really feel this yet. Some of you, like you're getting into some classes and maybe you're online or you hear things, and it seems like every conversation pits science and faith against each other, right? It's like either you believe in God in the Bible or you believe in science, right? And you have to pick one. And in fact, in most conversations today, like when this topic comes up, or when somebody's trying to cite their faith about something, or cite science for something, it seems like it's all brought up around this framework that says you're this or that. In fact, it can almost seem like they're complete and total opposites, like working against each other and fighting for, well, which one's right, which one's wrong, right? And so oftentimes, what will happen is something along the lines of this will happen, where somebody will grow up in church, they'll be a Christian, and they believe in the Bible, and they go off to college, and in class, a professor will say something that contradicts, something that you grew up believing in the Bible. Maybe nowadays it's not even in college, it's maybe in middle school or high school science class. They'll say, well, billions of years ago, when nothing was around, there's this spontaneous event, right? The Big Bang. And from nothing came something. And then life evolved over the course of billions of years from there, right? And then suddenly when you talk about your faith, they're like, no, you can't believe in the Bible because it says 7 days. Whereas science tells us billions of years, right? And so that's an example of something that might come up in the future for you, or something that you might have heard of, or something similar that says, well, we know this to be true, and the Bible says this, therefore the Bible is wrong. If you can't trust in the Bible, then you can't trust God, then your faith is meaningless, right? It's either science or your faith. And there's this and let me just tell you now, that's a false framework, right? Those two things, like science and faith, as we're going to talk about in this series, they actually do work together, and they work together well. They don't have to be at odds against each other, but this world wants you to think that you have to pick one. Especially in the academic world, because if you have to pick one, then they will cite science and facts and say, there, see, that trumps your faith, you shouldn't believe in God. Whereas as Christians, there's a different perspective to take on this. So that's what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, and I'm really excited about it. This is something that we talk about from time to time, but it's not something we get really the opportunity to talk about super often. So how many of you guys, you've done science experiments yet in class? Yeah, do you enjoy science experiments? Do you mind if I do one? You've probably seen this one. This is the most common one. You guys ever made volcanoes before? No? Okay, good. So this is my little beaker, because I didn't have a beaker. So this is baking soda. This is baking soda. So how many of you guys have helped your parents cook or something, or you've used baking soda before, right? It's just this white powdery substance, right? And how many of you guys you've smelled vinegar before? Does it smell great? It's like this clear liquid, right? Right? No. So vinegar and this clear liquid and this white powder don't seem like they go together, do they? Like you'd think, well, what could they possibly do together, right? It's just like some white powder and some liquid. You're going to pour it together and stir it around, and then it's going to be like liquid with powder in it, right? That's what you would think. Those of you naive who have never seen the volcano experiment before. But in reality, there's something different that happens when these two things mix. Wow, chemical reaction. Yeah. So there's a chemical reaction that happens. If you want to know the science behind it, you can look it up later. But basically, what we discover is that these two things that didn't seem like anything would happen when they come together, they actually come together and create something pretty awesome, right? And the silly little point of the whole thing is that with science and faith, a lot of times people will tell you those things can't go together. They don't coincide. But in reality, they actually are pretty awesome when you put them together. And that's really what we're going to be talking about and focusing on, not only this week, but for the next coming weeks as well, because it's really important for you guys to be able to have the ability to stand on your own 2 feet when it comes to your faith and believing in God and what He says and what He's revealed to us in His Word, in the Bible, without having to doubt scientific discovery or compromise on like the realities of the world. The reality is that science often points us to God. That what we learn about the world can actually enhance our faith, and what we learn about the world through the Bible actually enhances our knowledge on science as well. And it's not just me saying this. In fact, this has been said all throughout history by lots of different people. So for instance, you guys heard of that guy named Copernicus? If you're like me and you had to brush up because you just recognize the name, let me just remind you and refresh your memory. Copernicus lived in the 1400s. He studied planets and the stars, right? And he actually discovered that the earth revolves around the sun, not the sun revolving around the earth. It's not the sun that rises and falls. It's the earth that rotates around it that gives the appearance of the sun rising and falling. Copernicus discovered that. Also, he was a Christian who believed in the God of the Bible. In the 1500s, this guy Galileo made a lot of cool discoveries about science, right? He knew so much that actually people started calling him the father of science. Have you guys studied him in your textbooks yet? Yeah? Okay. So he was also a Christian. Later on, there's a guy named Isaac Newton. Sound familiar? Right? Considered one of the greatest scientists ever, but he spent a lot of time writing and learning about God as well because he was a Christian. By the 1900s, there's a guy named William Kelvin. You guys heard of the Kelvin scale for like temperature and stuff? So he was a Christian. And there's many others all throughout history that we could talk about that were Christians. But just in preparation for this message, I actually looked up a bunch of other modern day scientists that are Christians. And disclaimer, I don't know these people or their work very well, but I looked them up and they were Christians. So like this person, Robert Selvendran, I don't know who that is, but he works on plant research, and he's also a church leader and theologian. So he's in like the realm of biology as it pertains to plants and all that kind of stuff, and in plant research, but he's also an avid believer in Jesus. You got Catherine Hayhoe, who is a professor and scientist that studies like the world's climate and how it changes through time and through the years, and how all that kind of fun stuff works. There's Mary Kenneth Keller, who is a pioneer in the field of computer science, who is actually also a nun, which is kind of interesting, right? There's this person named Amalalu Fuguana, I don't know, something. So you guys recognize that name? Me neither. But he was a Christian. He's a microbiologist and a faith scholar. And he does a lot of work, and he shows the world how his studies in science actually inform his faith in God. So he's one of those that talks about that. And then there's Katherine Johnson, I can say that name, who is a space scientist, physicist, and mathematician who directly impacted the first manned space flight. It's kind of cool. Also a follower of Jesus. So you've got all these people throughout history in modern time who are avid Christians, believe in God, believe in the Bible, and yet they're in the world of science. And they're experts in their field. And in fact, their faith informs the way they view the world and how they interpret the evidence found in science and scientific data, as well as what they discover in the world of science, how that informs what they read in the Bible and who God is. And so you will find that this doesn't have to be something that's at odds with each other. It's something that can actually help your faith when put together in the proper context. So this is really cool. We're going to go through the book of Genesis real quick in chapter 1. And the whole Bible starts out with this phrase, in the beginning, God. Now, that's only 4 words, but it tells us a lot. Okay? What are some things you could draw from those 4 words? There's light and dark. Okay. God was there in the beginning. God what? He was the first thing ever. Yes. So before, what? He created. We haven't gotten to that part yet. But you're right. Good answer. In the beginning, there was God. God was there first before anything else. And the very first pages of Scripture tell us everything we need to know when it comes to how we interpret science in the Bible. That God was at the root of all of it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. So here we find basically this what we need to recognize when we read the book of Genesis, and when we hear people trying to pit the Bible versus science like they're against each other, oftentimes they will use books like Genesis to say, like, see, there's a discrepancy here in how we know the world works. But what we need to understand is that the Bible tells us what we need to know about God and his relationship to us. The purpose of the Bible is not to show us how the world works, right? And as scientific discoveries happen over time, they reinforce this truth. You don't have to reinterpret the Bible or anything like that to make it fit in modern day science. What we have to understand is that the original purpose of Genesis was to teach us about who and what happened, not necessarily how it happened. So, keeping that in mind, I need, 6 volunteers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 volunteers to help me read through this. So, we'll do you 3 boys, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So I want you to come on up to the stage, and can you see the screen from where you're at? Here, I'll back this up for you a little bit. And I'm going to have you guys read through the passage. So go ahead and get in a line right here up front. Single file line across the front of the stage. Like right here. Single file line in front of the stage. There you go. I don't know how that was confusing.
It was super confusing.
You're just confusing, Zach. Okay, so you're going to be day 1, okay? You're going to be day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and then the last paragraph. So we're not necessarily getting into day 6 there. Almost fell off the stage. Okay, day 1. All right, and I'll let you hold this. I'm going to get out of your way. Okay.
Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
No, keep going.
And God said that the light has good when he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness passed evening, and morning came, making the first day.
Okay, day 2.
Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters, to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heaven. God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, making the second day.
Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear." And that is what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the waters, seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation. Every sort of seed-bearing plant and trees will grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came."
Good.
And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation of all sorts, bearing seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, making the third day.
Then God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth," and that is what happened. God made 2 great lights, a larger one to govern the day and a smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good.
Okay, go ahead and keep going for a second for that last top line.
And evening passed and morning came, making the 4th day.
Cool. Liam?
Then God
You're good. Go
Then
ahead.
God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." Evening passed, and morning came, making the 5th day.
Cool. All right, go ahead and give them a hand. You guys can go grab a seat. And as you're going to your seat, I'll finish this out. It says, "Then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind. Livestock, small animals, and scurry along the ground." That scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw what? That it was good, right? So this is pretty amazing. This basically accounts for, this is the story of creation, right? This is talking about how in the beginning God created everything. Now again, you'll see some themes. If you continue reading this on your own later and read into chapter 2, you'll see some of the same things, but maybe switched around in a different order. And it's not to say that the Bible's flawed or contradicting itself, but the Bible's trying to tell us something. It's trying to tell us and introduce different themes about who God is and who we are in relation to Him. And so we have to understand that. And in the early days where people would read literature, or when they would tell stories, they would tell things cyclically or in cycles. So you would tell something, and then it'd come back around to something, and then maybe tell the same thing differently so that you get a different point out of it, a different perspective. And so you see that the Bible does this all throughout. And it'll tell things in a cyclical fashion, okay? But we think in our Western worldview in a linear fashion, which we think start, middle, end. And the Bible doesn't always operate that way. So sometimes when we read that and impose our ways of thinking on the text, we make it say what it wasn't originally trying to say. And a lot of modern scientists who aren't Christians might point to that and say, see, you can't trust the Bible. But you have to recognize this is the narrative from God to us about how He created the world, and not just the how, because again, that's not really the purpose, but the fact that God created the world. And later, as we'll talk about next week, we are created in His image, and what that has to do with our faith when it combines with science. So basically what I want to give you guys as the bottom line this week is that when you take a minute to stop and you look at creation, you look at the world around you, there's this idea that you look at it, it's so complex, it's so unique, it's so beautiful. You look at the world, in all of creation points to a creator. This didn't happen by accident. In fact, the more you study science, the more you understand how improbable, next to impossible, it would have been for all of us to be here by accident, by chance. And that's your only other option. Either there is a higher power that facilitated the creation of the world, put us here, the way you see now, or it happened by accident. You can't have any middle ground. And so for me, as a Christian, after even just a little bit of science that I do know, I think it takes way more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. When you read the texts in class, when it talks about natural selection or the Big Bang, how something was created out of nothing, it's like you can't read that and not think, wow, who caused that? What caused that? When you ask that question, what caused it? They'll say, we don't know. It just happened, right? That sounds like a big faith statement. And as Christians, we would go, yeah, I know what caused it. I know what happened. And personally, I disagree with the way a lot of science books lay out how we got to where we are today. That's fine. That doesn't really even matter. What matters is that God created it. Okay? God created the world. He created everything that we see around us today. And as we'll talk about next week, when it comes to you and me, we're here for a unique and special purpose. And science can actually help inform our purpose. But when you look around at creation, you see that it points to a creator. So, first thing I want to challenge you guys with as we're kind of closing out this week is, one, be comfortable asking tough questions, right? As somebody who likes to learn and have answers for everything, how many of you are the kind of person that you can see something and you don't really need to know how it works? You don't care about the answers. You're just like, oh, okay, that's cool, and you'll move on. How many of you are that kind of person? Okay? How many of you are the kind of person that like, tell me how it works. Tell me everything, right? I want to know the details, right? There's people, maybe you're a mixture of the two, but like there's people on either spectrum most of the time. You tend to lean towards one or the other, and that's fine, but you can't be afraid of asking questions wherever you are on that spectrum. Questions are a good thing. It informs you. What matters is your worldview, your framework for how you ask the question, not how, but the where you're coming from when you're looking for the answers to your questions. Because if you're looking to disprove God, you can find a lot of things that will help you stake your life on that. But if you're looking at things through the worldview, through the perspective, through a framework that God is behind all things, then that will inform how you interpret the evidence that we see on earth. Does that make sense? It's a matter of interpretation or worldview, the way you see the world, your perspective. It's much more that than it is facts. Because facts can be skewed to interpret however you want. The important part for you and for your faith and for your relationship with God is to understand that God is behind all things. And if you come with that perspective, you don't have to be afraid of asking tough questions. You don't have to be afraid of those things. Secondly, learn about God and science, right? Those two things go really well together. Like, for instance, if the world was like even just a couple inches off of its axis from the sun, our atmosphere would be unsustainable for life, right? We'd all burn up or freeze to death. Like, there's no middle ground, even just a couple inches. Like, that sounds like God is holding all things together to me when I study science, right? There's lots of little things like that you guys can talk about more in your groups, or I'm sure some of you have some of those cool facts. Number 3, talk to wiser adults. Talk to older, wiser adults, because the reality is they're going to have a better perspective on life than you. They've got more life experience. They've studied this more. They've had to grapple with these questions themselves already, and they're here. They've come to a conclusion that is not incompatible with science, but that informs their faith. So ask older and wiser Christian adults, because the creation that you see in the world today points to a creator. As Christians, we believe that person is Jesus. So let me pray for you guys. You guys will go to your groups, but when you go to your groups, I want you to think about one thing in creation that reminds you of the Creator. What's one thing in creation that reminds you of the Creator? I'm going to pray. You'll go to your groups.